it's the opening of a Pandora's box, and that's a very sad thing that's happened with this whole situation. When they talk about threat to democracy, that's your real threat to democracy. And I feel that as a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple.
That was former President Donald Trump making the case for presidential immunity. It was just a short time ago when he made those remarks after arguments were heard in a D.C. courtroom today stemming from his election subversion case. Trump's legal team says his actions following the 2020 election were well within his official capacity as president. But special counsel Jack Smith argues Trump broke the law and tried to reverse his loss. Regardless of the outcome from today's hearing, the issue is expected to work its way up to the Supreme Court. Let's bring in now Jonathan Turley, a George Washington University law professor, constitutional law attorney, and a Fox News contributor, and also Kerri Kupec Urbahn, a Fox News legal editor and former counselor to Attorney General Bill Barr. Welcome to you both. Kerri, you were in that room today. Give us your top-line thoughts and your takeaway from what you saw and heard.
The former president was stoic. He was sitting at counsel's table. He was leaning forward. He was obviously paying very close attention to what was happening. And I thought one of the most compelling questions posed by the judges was actually to DOJ, where one of the judges asked, well, why will this not open up the floodgates if we reject your client's defense of immunity? In other words, if we say that the president is not immune from prosecution for official acts conducted while in office, how will this not become license for political enemies to prosecute each other upon leaving the White House? I thought that was a very good question and really one that gets to the heart of this issue.
Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us as well. There was quite a remarkable exchange where the headline basically is reading that the former president's lawyer argued that presidents can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate political rivals. This was a stunning exchange in the courtroom with Judge Pan and former President Trump's attorney. Let's listen and play this out.
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes. There's a political process that would have to occur under the structure of our Constitution, which would require impeachment and conviction by the Senate. In these exceptional cases, as the OLC memo itself points out from the Department of Justice, you'd expect a speedy impeachment and conviction. But what the founders are much more worried about than using criminal prosecution to discipline presidents was what James Madison calls in Federalist Number 47, the newfangled and artificial treasons. They were much more concerned about the abuse of the criminal process for political purposes to disable the presidency from factions and political opponents. And of course, that's exactly what we see in this case.
Is that the case, Jonathan? Can a president, under certain circumstances, order the assassination of a political rival and receive immunity for it?
I don't believe it is the case. This was really, I think, very illustrative of how the argument went. It was a series of jump scares. Both sides were presenting these parades of horribles that would come if you don't accept our argument. I think what was clear to me from the argument was that probably Trump's this argument of impeachment first, prosecution later is a dead letter with the panel. I don't believe that the judges agreed that you needed a conviction to ever prosecute a president. But there's still a lot of ambiguity there. The question is what the court described in Nixon versus Fitzgerald as the outer parameters of presidential authority or duties. And the question is, does this fit within that gray area? Because the Supreme Court and the lower courts have struggled for this, and it's not clear. And so there's legitimate debate here. I did not come away thinking the panel was likely to rule with the former president. At some points, they seemed to be debating more as to whether I'm going to use a sledgehammer or a stiletto. I mean, they were arguing what is the best grounds for getting rid of this appeal. But, we really don't know, and time will tell. But what is clear is that it won't take much time.
Really interesting. Finally, Kerri, I'll get your reaction to what we heard in that courtroom as far as the attorneys debating. Ultimately, this was Trump's attorney debating what the frightening future really is. Listen.
What kind of world are we living in if, as I understood my friend on the other side to say here, a president orders his SEAL team to assassinate a political rival and resigns, for example, before an impeachment? Not a criminal act. President sells a pardon, resigns, or is not impeached? Not a crime. I think that is extraordinarily frightening future.
We are in a situation where we have the prosecution of the chief political opponent who's winning in every poll, presidential election upcoming next year, and is being prosecuted by the administration that he's seeking to replace. That is the frightening future.
I want to get your thoughts and takeaway from that, Kerri.
Well, it's tricky because at the end of the day, it's very discretionary, and that's the question, and that's what I was getting at rather, with the question posed by, I think it was Judge Henderson, about the floodgates that will open. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have DOJ prosecutors or federal prosecutors making decisions as to, if a president's not immune, as to what constitutes unofficial acts, and conduct that would be perhaps in the normal world construed as criminal is not when one is president. And some of the examples they went through, Obama and drone strikes on citizens, the rationale that George Bush gave for going into Iraq, various things that are complicated when not just running this country, but leading the free world. And that's where this becomes a potential Pandora's box if there's not a deference towards immunity. But like Professor Turley said, it's a complicated issue, and this particular area of immunity has not really been explored.
And there's big questions over what the political impact of all of this really will be. We'll dig into that a bit later in the show. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Kerri, Jonathan, thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.